Hey everyone, Lex here again, and I know it's been a while, but in this video we are playing Path of Exile 1, Secrets of the Atlas, while also giving my takes and comparisons to, my Path of Exile 2 experience, what I think they did better in one game versus the other, or worse, etc. At this point, a lot of you know me from my Path of Exile 2 content, a game which I have sunk a ton of hours into, and I've just been coasting on my Avatar of Fire Shield Warrior build in that game. I mean, I've reached a point in the endgame where I'm just, optimizing, trying to craft like crazy upgrades, but at this point I've conquered all the tier 4 endgame stuff, as you know from my last video. However, there was some real hype building around this latest Path of Exile 1 expansion in League, and I gotta say, I got interested pretty quickly. I mean, full disclosure, I actually played Path of Exile 1 way back in the day, back when Dominus was actually the last boss of the game, and I think this was around like 12 years ago or so, but I'm sure the game couldn't have changed that much, right? So for fun, I decided to play my way through Path of Exile 1 without following any build guides or anything like that. It's funny how often that is pitched as something you have to do to get into Path of Exile 1, but I thought it'd be fun to try and recreate the theme of my Path of Exile 2 character in Path of Exile 1, as close as I reasonably could. So that's right, we're going Shield Warrior again, baby. Though as a quick note, this video is going to be one of a two-part series. For now, we're just going to focus on the leveling and campaign experience, as well as some of the other systems like crafting and some of the field events that you find in Path of Exile 1 that, you stumble across as you're playing through the campaign. I just want to make sure that I give the Path of Exile 1 endgame a fair amount of time before giving my opinion on it, because I know that the majority of praise for Path of Exile 1 is the absolutely loaded and perfected and optimized endgame stuff, so I'll have another video on that once I've hopped into it all and checked it out, all with this improvised build that I plan on taking as far as I can. But for now, let's compare what the two games are like earlier on. Alright, since I've been playing Path of Exile 2 is pretty much my main game, I just want to make clear that that is where my expertise lies, not Path of Exile 1. I am simply winging it through, not following any guides, and sharing my experience and how it compares to Path of Exile 2 as a relatively new player. Also, I'll briefly go over my leveling build through the campaign and what I'm thinking down the line as I approach the endgame and all that fun stuff. And honestly, I'm just going to do what I can to topple as much of the endgame content as possible without looking at guides, just a bit of light research, on some uniques and skill gems that might be beneficial to my build. But let's start with what the early game experience has been thus far. So obviously I went with Marauder, what I played 12 years ago, and also the most warrior adjacent class as far as I could tell. And right off the bat, I could tell it was going to take a minute to adjust back to the point-and-click movement style again. WASD movement in Path of Exile 2 just feels so good. And when I first started Path of Exile 1, I was definitely hitting those keys trying to move after just checking my inventory or after hitting a menu screen. Definitely took some adjusting, but I got there. But yeah, I mean, overall, I gotta say, I really like how movement felt otherwise. Honestly, speed is what comes to mind. I mean, Jesus Christ, why did they ever get rid of Quicksilver flasks? I mean, it was like a breath of fresh air, just being able to use those things again. And I felt kind of bad because I was so used to Path of Exile 2 that I wasn't actually using them enough at first during the earliest parts of this playthrough, so that was something I had to reacclimate to. This early on in the playthrough, a few things stand out to me. Being a Shield Marauder, I was surprised at how viable it was damage-wise so early. Shield charges there, but it felt a little clunkier and not quite as strong as the Path of Exile 2 variant. Kind of feathery and also like weightless feeling compared to Path of Exile 2, though it was kind of cool that it had no cooldown and still had some decent use covering distances between groups or as an initiator. But Shield Crush is actually the move I fell in love with. That thing you get so early and it hits so fast and it does decent damage and it has decent AoE. I could go on, but I really ended up liking that skill, man. Funnily enough, it felt kind of like a on-demand magma barrier from Path of Exile 2. Like, you didn't have to time an active block or anything, you just whipped your shield out and started blasting. But yeah, we'll talk in more detail about the skills I rolled with in the build section of this video. Also, sort of related here, but I really like that you can buy so many different skill gems from the vendors in each act as you complete quests. Even in Act 1, and that you get so many different options from the quest rewards. For me, it just sort of felt like the game opened up quicker than in Path of Exile 2, as far as like what avenues you could pursue with your build and what ways you want to deal damage. This might just be because Path of Exile 2 doesn't have a lot of weapon types in the game yet, so maybe that's what's holding it back. But I remember stumbling upon all of these skill gems after checking that second tab of the, one of the Act 1 vendors and just revamping my build a bit, right then and there. You also start running running into the new Mercenaries mechanic pretty early on. I'm sure you've heard all about it or have already experienced it. And I gotta say, this feels like a pretty big W so far. I really dig the mechanic. It's super fun. Basically, mercs will play the role of a pretty strong companion or a loot pinata. You just have to duel them for either choice. And sometimes they are really strong companions, at least a bit later on. They can get nuked down kind of early in the playthrough, in my opinion, but they start feeling a bit stronger starting in Act 2. Though I've heard that they can get a little crazy in the end game, like one-shotting you during a duel crazy. But I think GGG has already fixed this. I think there was a certain modifier that let their damage bypass all of your defenses or something. But anyways, and their loot is sometimes really good. I got this unique item as early as the prison in Act 1. It was this one-handed axe that gave me move speed and had some decent damage. Honestly, just really dug it for the move speed, but I just love that the mercs are a legit source of good items without seeming too good. And the same goes with using them as a party member. Not totally overpowered, but they are damn strong. Well, actually, I had this merc in the last few acts that was just kind of wiping groups pretty easily, so maybe some of them are a little overtuned. I can't be quite sure. But yeah, I mean, overall, my playthrough was really smooth. I went a more defensive build, as you'll see here in the build section of the video, and I was feeling pretty cozy the whole way through. I didn't die one time. Well, actually, I died once to a merc in a duel, but honestly, other than that, not one time. However, somewhat related to this, as a knock against Path of Exile 1, something I like in Path of Exile 2 is the challenge presented throughout the campaign, and also the pacing of your character's strength. Feels better in Path of Exile 2 in my opinion. I actually stopped full clearing zones pretty early on in Path of Exile 1 because it was just so easy to get ahead on levels in the campaign. And I think this may have contributed to, why I didn't die very much at all, not even against any of the major bosses. Like the difficulty was reminding me a little bit of Diablo 4, but maybe not quite that easy. I also felt like many times through Path of Exile 1's campaign that the zones weren't too big, but there were just so many zones that you had to fight or zoom through. This definitely contributed to me skipping a lot of stuff, Quicksilver flasking to objectives as quickly as I could, and is also why this video took so long to make, to be honest. There were moments even then where I felt like I was getting a little bored, or that I wished I was at a boss that's been hinted at instead of having to fight through another zone. I think a good example of this is the first time you fight Kitava. I was so hyped after clearing like 3 zones to climb that ladder, get to that rooftop, and fight him as the quest text suggested. But as soon as you zone into that rooftop, it's just another huge zone filled with a ton of mobs you have to fight before you even reach the guy. I was like, come on. And yeah, I mean, speaking of boss fights and all of the major boss fights, no risk really. I think the closest I got to dying was the end of Act 1, and that maybe on the final fight with Kitava, and a couple of scary rares along the way, but other than that, no outright deaths from difficulty. I think again this may be due to how easy it is to be over-leveled for each zone, or dare I say that the boss fights and the boss designs in Path of Exile 2's campaign are better. I just found myself more engaged during Path of Exile 2's campaign's boss fights, for sure. I think they are all pretty awesome, and it feels like there's an actual risk of dying if you screw up badly. I did not get that same feeling in Path of Exile 1, which is fine. They are different games, but I think I prefer the challenge in Path of Exile 2 in that regard. And also, this might be controversial to you Path of Exile 1 faithfuls, but I kind of think I preferred the bigger but less zones design of Path of Exile 2 compared to Path of Exile 1. I don't know why, I just felt like that at times I was hopping from instance to instance instead of like journeying somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, I understand that Path of Exile 1 vets may be able to zoom through the campaign much more quickly since you know what all you can skip, but giving my relatively new player experience here, there just felt like there were too many zones and a total of 10 acts to play through. Just started feeling a little bit like a drag, and honestly after Act 5 or 6 I was sitting there going, alright, I think I'm ready for the end game now. Yeah, there's a little more to it, but I gotta say campaign-wise and leveling-wise, I just gotta give it up for Path of Exile 2. Its campaign isn't even complete, but I still somehow just prefer it so far. I don't know, man. It was cool going through Path of Exile 1 and reliving some of those earlier moments up to Dominus. There were still some glimmers of memory there from 12 years ago, like in Act 2 when you move the Vol seal and the forest goes dark. I loved experiencing that stuff again, honestly, but yeah, I mean, overall, I just dig the campaign in Path of Exile 2 more. Sorry, y'all. That said, though, there are some things that I think Path of Exile 1 does better. Alright, so first things first, a lot of commenters mentioned how nice the crafting was in Path of Exile 1, and I wasn't really sure what to expect. Then once I got to the crafting bench and started toying around with it, I quickly see what y'all meant. Yeah, I mean, the best way to describe it is that it just feels good to me. It feels good to choose exactly the modifier you want to just boost up an item a little, and just to make it more relevant to your build rather than Path of Exile 2, where, yeah, you're basically just gambling and hoping something nice will happen. I realize that the crafting becomes more in-depth and that you can add more than one crafting modifier as you progress later in the game, albeit those additional modifiers you add are way more expensive, but still, just being able to specifically choose the way you want to make an item better actually feels like crafting. I definitely see why people dislike Path of Exile 2's crafting, gambling system. Also, I just want to highlight the events you encounter through Path of Exile 1's campaign. Like, I realized Path of Exile 2, you encounter rituals in Act 1, but in Path of Exile 1, I ran into, a Legion event in Act 1, a Breach in Act 2, rituals in Act 2, those weird Vol alternate reality zones throughout the campaign, Mercenaries as early as Act 1, Delirium Mirrors sometime later, Expedition, those super goofy tower defense mini games that I really enjoyed, actually. Man, I could go on. So this might be the result of GGG optimizing the hell out of the endgame of Path of Exile 1 over, literal decades, but I really liked encountering all of those events through the campaign so early on, too. I mean, a lot of that stuff I assume turn into endgame encounters, which is very fun, and I love that they introduce you so early in your playthrough as like a, a preview of things to come. So yeah, even though I felt the campaign was a bit sloggy in Path of Exile 1, those moments definitely helped me mix it up a bit, and I really dug every event that I came across, and I loved checking them out. Super fun. Honestly, a big point to Path of Exile 1 there. And another thing I'd like to point out is the passive skill tree. At first it seemed kind of bloated to me, but if you've been following my channel for a while now, you know that I love coming up with character builds, and after studying it for a bit, it just seemed like a character builder's paradise, actually. Like, there's so many variables and knobs you can tweak to try and optimize your character or alter your play style, a lot of different keywords to learn, but honestly that's something I really dig. I love all the different variables. And I mean, so far my build has been working swimmingly. Absolutely no issues, and this is without following a build guide or anything. Again, some minimal research I did to look up the passive skill tree beforehand and some skill gems before hopping in. And even after experimenting a bit, I just sort of get a decent idea of what I wanted to try out with this character and where to go with him. And you know what, this isn't going to be one of my classic character build videos, but let's just very quickly take a look at what I improvised while leveling, because I actually do quite like the passive skill tree in this game. Alright guys, as you know, I normally go into pretty deep detail in my passive skill tree, but for the sake of time, I'm going to give you more of the overall idea here while pointing out some specifics. This is because I'm sure many different builds can work when just progressing through the campaign or leveling, and I would consider the real test of a build is its capability to progress in the end game. So in my next video, I'll go into more detail on my build as it performs tackling the end game stuff, hopefully successfully. But with that said, let's just go over, what I leveled with and what I plan on starting end game maps with real quick. Obviously went with the Chieftain Ascendancy and grabbed the fire resist stuff out the gate. For you Path of Exile 2 players, this is 1-for-1 used in the Smith of Katava Ascendancy. I mean, this one is basically Coal Stoker, and this one is basically Forged in Flame. Super useful as far as making you tanky and simultaneously loosening up gear restrictions by making you so easily elemental resist capped. But yeah, I mean, overall, the progression I went with was a combination of tankiness and fire damage, where I could pick it up, and this is not only due to the theme of my Path of Exile 2 character, but also the alternative version of Shield Crush called Shield Crush of the Chieftain. That skill just deals all fire damage without me having to pick up Avatar of Fire. Full disclosure, I knew about this gem before going into the game, but I was lucky and got it on my second Ascendancy trial, so it just made sense to start cranking up the fire damage after that. Also, I initially progressed through this cluster early on, which I don't think was a bad choice, but as I got my first Ascendancy node that made half of my fire resist apply to all elemental resists, I found I didn't need these nodes as much. I mean, these are all just basically elemental resists, and I'd much rather have maximum elemental resists instead. That was going to be more valuable to me, so that's why I respect and kind of went towards, this path here and towards this cluster. But yeah, I basically just progressed down this path here and just grabbed the kind of nodes that I needed, like some accuracy nodes here, some Ignite chance here, which I'm kind of iffy on still. I always find Ignite chance to be kind of impractical or inefficient coming from Path of Exile 2. But there's a certain support gem that kind of boosts your damage as you're reapplying Ignites over and over, so I wanted to experiment with that a bit, but these are definitely subject to switching around. Some aura boosts here, some shield stuff here, We have some life and armor nodes here, which is something I direly miss in Path of Exile 2. It made me realize how bad those just armor nodes are, knowing that these exist in Path of Exile 1, you know, having maximum life and increased armor. Maybe they're a little too powerful, and that's why they are not in Path of Exile 2, I'm not really sure. But yeah, just basically increasing tankiness, endurance charges I found to be pretty useful in this game, perhaps better than Path of Exile 2, because I think they provide you a like a passive benefit in this game where they increase your resistances and your armor and just your tankiness overall per endurance charge. I don't think they do that in Path of Exile 2. I could be wrong, maybe I have to look into that a little more. But yeah, I've just been progressing up this way, grabbing elemental damage here, more maximum resist stuff here, and then some more maximum life and chaos resist here. And there's also some energy shield stuff which will make me go hybrid again, which is something that's, you know, it's very similar to my Path of Exile 2 character, so it's kind of cool to see it work out that way. But yeah, as far as future considerations, I think I'm going to progress in this direction. There's this nice fire damage and area of effect cluster here, which I think I'm probably going to grab, and also this keystone, which I think could be good. Skills that have dealt a critical strike in the past 8 seconds deal 40% more elemental damage with hits and ailments. It seems like it could be good for my build. I'm not sure though. It seems like there's a pretty big downside to that, but I'm already kind of giving critical strikes anyway with a certain fire mastery thing, so I think it might be worth it. Again, this was just my campaign into early maps build, but if you're interested at looking at it in more detail, I mean, I'll have a PoE Ninja link in the description box down below, or where you can refer to the skill tree and the masteries I went with alongside all the, the gear, the skill gems, the support gem choices I made, etc. Speaking of skill gems, I'll mouse over everything I'm using, but I mean, basically it's all about shield crush of the Chieftain and choosing various supports and other skill gems to crank up the damage of that thing. You'll notice a little bit of clunkiness in the current build as I experiment. For example, I'm running some things that give me percentage of physical damage gained as fire damage abilities like Infernal Cry and Herald of Ash, and since shield crush of the Chieftain is all fire damage, no physical, it's probably not optimal to run things like those, so I'll probably play around with some other auras, or maybe some banners, etc. Again, I will go into more detail on the build in my next video focusing on the endgame stuff only, but for now I wanted to leave you with my take on Path of Exile 1's campaign and leveling experience. Alright, I'm not going to beat around the bush, but perhaps unsurprisingly, guys, as far as leveling and the campaign aspects go, I still think I prefer Path of Exile 2. It's not just the big upgrade in visual fidelity. I actually think Path of Exile 1 is still a great looking game, don't get me wrong, but when you look at the two side by side, it's clear that Path of Exile 2 is the upgrade. It's also not just about the better sound design or the WASD movement, but it's things like the campaign pacing, which I know isn't complete in Path of Exile 2, but even still, I just like the progression of your character's strength and the number of zones in that game much more than what I experienced in Path of Exile 1. Again, I guess they designed the axe accounting for the Quicksilver flask, but like, bro, I was just chain drinking that thing at times and trying to get through the zones as quickly as I could at certain points. There are just so many like instances and floors in each act, I also prefer the campaign boss fights in Path of Exile 2. Again, I think Path of Exile 1, there wasn't much of a risk at all as I was going through. A couple of spiky damage moments here and there and some mechanics I learned to avoid, but none of which resulted in a death. I also found that the amount of times bosses went invincible in Path of Exile 1 a little annoying. I don't know, I'm hoping to see some better boss fights in the endgame. Though I will give it up for that last Katava fight in Path of Exile 1. That was pretty awesome. Alright, all of this being said, I really do enjoy the number of field events in Path of Exile 1, the actual crafting in the game, and of course the robust passive skill tree. I'll have another video out on the endgame experience of Path of Exile 1. I want to give it an honest shot, and hopefully it won't take as long as this one to come out, but I wanted to make sure that I was being accurate and fair in my assessment of how I felt with the campaign and leveling experience, and that meant I had to slog through the entire campaign before going over it. But there's one last thing I'll say about my enjoyment of both games. So this might be a little cheesy, but there are moments in Path of Exile 2 where I just have come up with a build on my own, and I'm just blasting through a zone. Could be a campaign, could be a waystone, and it is just so satisfying to pull off a big yet dangerous screen clear, just feeling like you're unstoppable. And I kid you not, I will sometimes just utter the words, "Damn, I love this game," or "Damn, this game is good." Again, might be a little cheesy, I just do it though. It's like a natural reaction, it just happens. And I kid you not, guys, take this for what it's worth, but I caught myself doing the same thing in Path of Exile 1, even with all the complaints I have about the campaign. So despite preferring Path of Exile 2's campaign and leveling experience, I gotta say, Path of Exile 1 was still able to somehow hit the same height of enjoyment for me, where I'd say that to myself again, like I'd like that natural reaction. It's not something I intentionally am trying to do, so make of that what you will. Anyways, guys, this has been a longer one, but if you made it this far, I salute you. My next video will be about the endgame experience in Path of Exile 1, before likely switching back to Path of Exile 2 things. So take it easy, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.